Okay, so as a child, I would always go to my dad's house on the weekends, and while I was there, I would binge watch his DVD collection. And since my dad was a young, single dad in the early 2000s, he had a strange assortment of films, which included films like X-Men, Boys in the Hood, Rudy, Juice, Hoot, The Godfather, and this little 2003 film about a mentally handicapped man trying to make his way in the world, Radio. Now, it's been about 10 years since I remember first watching Radio, but about a week ago, I was on the Starz streaming service and came across the film. I remember loving it as a child, and the film being extremely emotional, even making me cry. But after rewatching Radio, I realized this film just really misses the mark when trying to fully tell the emotional story it wants to tell. Now, before I start, I would like to say rest in peace to James Robert Kennedy, the real life Radio, who passed away in 2019 due to pancreatitis and diabetes. From what I've read, he was a loving human and deserved nothing but the best. Now, let's talk about a film which depicts a very small portion of Mr. Kennedy's life, Radio. I say a very small portion of his life because the film Radio only covers about a year and a half of Radio's actual life, while he was 18 and 19. This is my first problem with the film. Besides this year, we learn nothing about Radio's life before or after the time in which the film takes place. It tells us in the post-credits he kept coaching the team and got inducted into the South Carolina Sports Hall of Fame, but what does that really tell us? From this film, you learn nothing about Radio's life if it doesn't extend from his football life. If it doesn't have to do with football, then this film doesn't truly care to show it. I understand he loved football, and it was a huge part of his life, possibly even helping him block out the negative aspects of his life. But making it the main focus of this film, I feel takes time away from focusing on the impact Radio had within his community.
Over 50 years as T.L. Hanna's biggest cheerleader.
Come your way, you get the quarterback.
A staple on the sidelines, but his presence in the special needs community just as impactful.
What do you got? A great heart.
For Brad Hammond, Radio was more than a best friend. He was an inspiration.
I got tears. One of them eyes. The day that he died. Because he was the greatest friend I ever had. He inspired me a lot. He inspired my this part of my life. And it's part of my heart. He's like family to me.
Like, the stuff with Johnny and Radio is good, and I enjoyed the character arc, but besides Johnny and the coach, Radio doesn't interact with much of his community at all. I think saving more time by cutting out some of the football plot would have given the filmmakers time to focus on more of Radio's life, which would have given them more time to show how much Radio really impacted his community in South Carolina. This film, at the end of the day, is about Radio, not the Hannah Yellow Jackets.
I'm proud of Radio. He's very proud. And I felt lucky to have him in my life.
I believe this film is absolutely at its best when it focuses on the emotion produced from the interaction between characters, so I won't lie and say the scenes between the coach and Radio aren't great, because they are. Ed Harris and Cuba Gooding Jr. have great chemistry which oozes out of every scene they have together. But the subplot with the coach and his family is boring as hell. I understand why it's there. Radio, and especially the death of Radio's mother, helps the coach realize he needs to straighten out his priorities and spend more time with his daughter. But Jesus Christ, this plot is so boring and underdeveloped, I couldn't care less about his daughter or their relationship. They have one good scene together in the car after Radio's mother's death, but other than that, there's nothing. The coach's wife is boring as shit too. She's just there to be this all-good Southern belle who spits out her all-good Southern belle wisdom. I mean, she even narrates the film, which comes out of nowhere and makes no sense. She narrates a film about Radio when she's only in about 2 scenes with him. This film doesn't even need a narrator. Or even if the filmmakers thought it did, why does it have to be the wife? Why not make it the coach? That makes more sense. Making the wife the narrator doesn't add to her character, it just makes the film confusing overall. Instead of focusing on Radio and his family, which would be ideal in a film titled Radio, they make it about this family who, besides the coach, doesn't interact with Radio at all. The daughter doesn't interact with him, but in about 1 or 2 scenes. The wife doesn't interact with him in about 1 or 2 scenes. It just makes no sense. It bugs me the film spends so much time badly developing the coach's family when they neglected to spend any time with Radio's, even taking out some of Radio's actual family members. Hell, the film only acknowledges Radio had an older brother who moved out, but it doesn't even acknowledge that he had a younger brother who lived with Radio during the time the film takes place. I think the reason we don't learn Radio's father and even one of his brothers suffered from the same condition he had is because the film is so caught up with telling us about football and sports that it forgets to tell us about Radio's own personal life. I know filmmakers need to twist reality when basing a film off a true story, but I think Radio's family life is a necessity when telling a story about his life. Radio's mom gets some character development, but I would argue the mom's only in the film to be set up to die later on. In one scene, she hugs Radio and says she'll always be there for him, and that's when I knew she was dead. Like, it was so obvious she was about to fucking croak. But even in these very small moments of interaction with the coach's family, they still get more character development than Radio's family. I mean, we don't even get to see Radio's older brother. What kind of sense does that make? In a film titled Radio, we only get to meet the mom. They only talk about the dad in passing. They don't even mention the younger brother he had. The older brother moved out, but he does come back. After Radio's mom dies, he comes back and he spends some time at home with Radio. You would think this would be some time to maybe get some character development in between the brother and Radio, but no. No, that makes no sense. I feel one of this film's biggest missteps is how hard it tries to come off as this lighthearted film, which makes absolutely no sense and it just doesn't work in the story. Take a movie like Rudy, for example. Rudy works as a lighthearted sports drama because it isn't about any really heavy-hearted topics. It's about this kid who just wants to grow up and play for Notre Dame, but he isn't athletically gifted. But he loves the sport so much that he sticks with it and he overcomes what everyone else says. That can be told in a lighthearted way. Radio's life story, at least from a filmmaker's perspective, isn't lighthearted. It's heavy as fuck. He was a mentally handicapped black man who lived in the 1970s in South Carolina. There is nothing lighthearted about that at all. It just doesn't work. And I really say this because I feel the film focuses on being lighthearted instead of heavy-hearted at the expense of the emotional impact of the film. One example is in the first scene in which we see Radio actually being bullied by the football team, particularly the football player Johnny, who kind of looks like Zac Efron and was taking me out of the film. I just kept thinking about Zac Efron from High School Musical bullying this mentally handicapped man. It was fucking me up. Now, I'd be lying if I said the scene wasn't disturbing. Seeing Radio tied up with tears in his eyes is striking. But my problem is that this is all we see of this event. We don't see the precursor. It just cuts from a scene with the coach to him finding Radio being bullied. The film so often switches perspective from Radio's to the coaches that it genuinely takes away from the experience. We should have been looking through Radio's perspective throughout this entire scene. Or at least use parallel editing to cut back and forth from Radio getting kidnapped to the coach coming to the situation. I mean, imagine if we had watched a team rip Radio from his buggy, tie him up, and throw him in the closet. You might be saying that's too harsh, but that's exactly my point. The film doesn't want to be harsh, even though it's attempting to tell a harsh story without showing all the harsh realities. Also, I have this theory where the film uses the coach's life and his family to block the viewer from the harsh realities going on in Radio's life. I mean, think about it. Every harsh moment with Radio is fed to us through the coach's perspective. Even Radio's mother's death. After his mom passes, Radio locks himself in his room, destroying his room entirely. But instead of showing Radio physically destroying the room, they chose to show us the daughter on the phone crying, and then the dad comes home, and then they drive over to Radio's house, and then they find Radio on the floor crying after he had already destroyed the room. This is another moment in which parallel editing could have saved if they had just cut between the daughter talking on the phone to radio destroying the room. I mean, that would have created some suspense, but they don't do that. We're just seeing the daughter on the phone crying, who never interacts with radio. We never see her interact with radio. I'm sure they interacted in real life during these events, but they don't show it in the film. They just tell us to assume it's happening. It really seems as if the filmmakers just didn't want to go too far. But then, why even go there? Why have Radio destroy his house if we aren't going to see the event happen? Why have Radio kidnapped if we aren't going to see him get kidnapped? We don't even get to see Radio's initial reaction to his mother dying. Not seeing Radio's initial reaction to his mother dying kills this movie for me. We see the daughter's initial reaction to Radio's mom dying. What kind of shit is that? That just shows you where this film's priorities lie. It doesn't want to tell Radio's story. The only reaction we get to see of Radio and his mother dying is the coach coming and calming him down, which is an emotional scene, and Cuba Gooding Jr. and Ed Harris deliver a great performance. But as a filmmaker, you can't rely solely on your actors to deliver all the emotion on their shoulders. The technical aspects of the film, like the cinematography, the editing, the sound, they all need to help with the emotional impact of the film, not just the actors. And this film just doesn't fully accomplish that. The cinematography was fine, the editing was fine, the sound was fine. I just really feel this film falls flat from a story structure perspective. I really feel like that's where this film was lost, in the writing. All in all, Radio as a film, I believe, misses the mark, but it definitely delivers a few good scenes emotionally, but this is mostly through the performances. Like I said, Ed Harris and Cuba Gooding Jr. kill it. I mean, Cuba Gooding Jr. kills it as Radio. I don't care what anyone says, he kills it, at least emotionally speaking. In the course of 7 days, I watched Radio 3 times, and each time I could say the experience was for the most part boring, with some good emotional scenes in between it. There were a few tearjerker moments, of course, but again, this was because of Cuba Gooding Jr. for the most part. And of course, this isn't the worst film I've ever seen. I just feel like this film really misses the mark in a lot of ways. I feel like this film could have been really good if it had chose to tell Radio's story and focus solely on Radio's story. I feel like it gets caught up in telling this football story and telling this story about this coach learning he needs to spend more time with his daughter, but that's not what this is about. This is about Radio, and I understand it's about Radio's impact with his community, but you don't even really get to see his impact with his community. You just see the impact between him and the coach, and that's where I really feel like the story gets caught up. It gets caught up in this friendship, which is great, but not at the expense of Radio's life. Not at the expense of telling Radio's actual story. Like, all you're telling is the story about him meeting this coach and they create a friendship, which is great, you know, but that should have been a subplot, not the main plot.
You know, it'd be one thing if you'd gone and done something like this before on your own. Radio, listen to me. It's important that you tell me why you went in the girls' locker room.
My dad will need me.
What for?
Huh? She want me to pick out that.
Did she ask you?
Huh?
Did she ask you?
No.
Who did?
No.
Radio, who asked you to go in the girls' locker room? Who asked you?
No.
No, I don't know what I'm supposed to do here.
Be mad at Radio.
Huh?
Be mad at Radio.
You willing to do that? Take the blame for someone else? You're a better man than me. I'll say that for you.